Welcome to the Gaia Report. I am Crystal Johnson, the co-host. Today we have a wonderful show in which you will learn about how to eliminate plastic waste with some interesting things happening with spoons and straws. But we also want to highlight that we have a very special guest, so please stay tuned. Welcome back to the Gaia Report. I'm Crystal Johnson, and today we have a very special guest. We are having a chance to speak with the town of Brookline in Massachusetts Health and Human Services Health Commissioner, Dr. Jett. Please welcome Dr. Jett to the Gaia Report. Thank you. I'm so happy to have you here because a lot of the work that I talk about regarding environmental issues is because I recognize them as public health issues. So it's always great to connect with town officials who do important work that is critical not just to public health, but also how it relates to also the parallel environmental health issues. And before we get into public health issues in Brookline and a whole array of things I'd love to talk to you about, really fascinated about your background. Just to share with those here that you started last April, May 2017, town of Brookline, Department of Health and Human Services. But your background, while it is in health policy, I noticed that your community engagement that parallel to humanitarian work was quite impressive. And so would love to hear from you what led up to your career interests in public health to this position, but to find out more about you and your background, and please share about your passion for humanitarian work and impact work.
So you will find this fascinating.
Okay.
I attended college actually for football and track.
Oh.
But my passion was artistry, so I was a painter.
Really? Oh, wow.
And so
watercolors, oils, I just have to ask. What medium?
Oils, watercolors, drafting,
Wow.
sketching.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Everything. So I did a lot of competitions growing up in Chicago.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to be an architecture engineer.
Okay.
So AutoCAD happened.
Yes.
And I was working in what I'm National Forest in Oregon.
Okay.
And I was doing environmental work, and I was actually designing roads for the Forest Service.
Oh, wow.
And I said, I like environmental things. So I went back to school and sort of shifted my career to agriculture and environmental.
Oh, that's great.
And as I began really to different facets of my career, I'm working in Louisville Metro, and I'm asked to focus in on social services and a Healthy Start program. And that's when I said, well, what is this program focused on? And it was infant mortality. So as I'm working on that, I'm still in the environmental department, and people were protesting in a neighborhood called West End, Louisville.
Okay.
And they said every day they woke up that there was ashes or some type of yellow film on their cars.
Oh, wow.
And so it was an environmental justice issue. And at that time, I wanted to make the connection. How does this impact people?
Yes.
And so we began to work on a study, and I knew nothing about public health. And I was approached about further my education and learning more.
Nice.
I resisted for a few years.
Okay.
But I actually began to learn that what I do in the health department is impacting people.
Yes.
And I always wanted to dedicate my life or my work to making a change in the world. And so that shifted my whole life. And it actually, I began to learn what public health was. Instead of, it was a softer science to me, but there's a certain amount of expertise you have to know. And so that's sort of how I began my career.
Oh, that's exciting.
So as I progressed, I've worked in clinical operations, Healthy Start program, WIC. I actually oversaw OBGYN practice in public health.
Wow.
A full-fledged dental office and primary care.
Okay.
areas that you would never see really in a public health department,
right.
along with environmental justice issues. And so I felt that my work impacted the population.
It does.
And it was very flexible.
Right.
So that gives you a little background how I got into the career.
Oh, that's great, because as I had mentioned to you previously when we were speaking, that the Gaia report really supports like workforce pipeline and talking with youth about career paths. And I love that you had shared that you had gone in for one with maybe a focus in the architecture and that design side, but through happenstance and opportunity, was able to navigate. Because so many people always figure out, do I have to have my career path set out, versus take like these organic cues that come up as you evolve and develop. So it's just really fascinating, like, how did you get from your undergrad to your work experience that led to this position? So
yeah, so it definitely was it was unanticipated.
Okay. Those are usually the best ones.
Those are the best ones. I think at first initially I was kicking and screaming, but my supervisor at the time said, you focus in on environmental engineering, and that's a hard science.
Yes.
But they really perceived me as being a leader that can move around the agency. And
oh, that's wonderful.
Once I stopped really fighting that process and accepting different opportunities,
right.
I wasn't in the medical field, but they sought me to end up managing clinics. And one day I'm managing 22 operations with 150 staff. And we did everything from the clinical side. So I think once, we begin to tell kids what public health is about, how it really impacts people, and it's the foundation in every community, kids would want to do that.
Yes. Well, one thing that I really enjoyed as I was learning more, about you and having, known people at that similar positions, and they can have the policy background, but your connection with the humanitarian work, which to me brought out that human element, would make you stand out, because it is critical. It's not just, policy. It is like having positive impact in communities, social service, and bridging everything together that might not have normally been connected. So that part to me was something that was like, wow, I really look forward to speaking with you. Can you share just a little bit of some of your humanitarian work that you found was pivotal or touched you in some way that you weren't maybe expecting?
So I tell you this bit of story first. And when I first graduated from college with my master's degree in environmental engineering, I actually took about 2 years from actually practicing to work for the Extension Service as a 4-H agent, but I was developing environmental programs for youth.
Oh, wow.
And so at that point I learned community organizing, how to bring volunteers together, but I wanted to see what kind of impact that I could have on the community itself. And then I wanted to know if I can devise a model that can be used in other communities. To really look at the impact that I was having on some of the social ills that was in the community, whether it was environmental justice or whether it was dealing with racism or unemployment, what model I could come up with. My first experiment outside, I wouldn't say it was an experiment, but my first real humanitarian effort was Hurricane Katrina. And I actually was over the logistics and supply at Belle Chase.
Oh, wow.
And I was on the Army side at that time, and I worked directly with General Andre. And the people, what I realized, that there were people in the urban areas impacted, but there were entities and agencies that should have been focused in the urban areas, but they were actually in the affluent areas. And so my unit tried to help people not only in the urban areas, but in the rural, because those people were left out of the loop. There were a lot of people that didn't have water points, they didn't have tarps for their house. Nobody actually checked on them. And so I saw the devastation, and I actually did a practicum experience and wrote it while I was there, because I was on my doctoral program. So that was my first real humanitarian work. But the last opportunity I had was actually to go to Africa to work on Ebola. And a lot of people were scared to go. So I would say that first and foremost, there were people scared to go. But I wanted to go.
Why?
Because I knew a lot of docs left the country. And if I didn't go abroad, to help Africa in this dire situation, then it was going to come back home.
Right.
And
Right.
this is a public health issue,
Yes.
and it's my career field.
Right.
So who better to go that
Yes.
has expertise and working on the ground?
Oh, that's so great.
And so I felt it was my mission to do that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you've taken all your experience and your expertise and brought it to the town of Brookline. On behalf of everybody here, we are thankful. Now, one thing I'd love to talk about for the Brookline Health and Human Services, where you are the health commissioner, what are some of the key issues in Brookline that Health and Human Services is focused on? Because I'm sure not many people, they live here, but they may not be aware.
Well, I think one of the things we need to do, we need to take a deeper dive on data.
Okay.
I want to find out an agency, people that really have some serious needs. And so we really don't have a pulse on different neighborhoods,
Right.
and the health elements that might be affecting
Oh,
them.
wow.
So that's on the top of the list.
Okay.
You know, we always pass policy. So my next initiative is to really get a grasp on how policy is really impacting health.
Okay.
We don't have the economics factor in that. So that's one. So when we look at, say for instance, polystyrene in a ban,
Yes.
how does that impact agencies? How does that impact health?
Right.
Can we really make a
Right.
connection with that?
Yes.
And so that's one of the next things that we look at. We also want to take a deeper dive into Rat Task Force.
You said rat.
Rat
Task
Task
Force.
Force. So we launched a Rat Task Force about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
And we receive a lot of complaints, but Brookline is growing and we have a lot of construction. And so the town has done a lot of innovative things in terms of, you know, making sure we have new garbage cans, you know, remove plastics from the ground, or paper bags or plastic bags,
Right.
et cetera. But with a lot of construction, we are disturbing the population. Okay. And so we need to find out really how to solve the problem. Larger cities are dealing with the issue, but we don't want it in Brookline.
Right.
So we
Right.
need to come up with some innovative solutions on how to reduce it. And maybe this can be a model that other towns and cities
Right.
can use.
Right.
So we collaborate across a lot of different agencies. We actually have an exterminator that's on the task force.
Okay.
And we'll make some recommendations to the select board hopefully in the next few months.
Now, how bad is the rat situation in Brookline compared to like maybe Boston or Newton?
Well, I just know it's this upward climb.
Okay.
Boston is a major city, so their issues is exacerbated, just as in New York.
Yes.
And my friends in D.C. actually was on a cover of a magazine talking about we trying to rid the city of rats. So the interesting thing is some of these rats that I have noticed are so big you can put a saddle on them and ride them. So
Right.
we probably want to
Right.
somehow
Right.
stop and reduce that.
Right.
And then, you know, we have small issues like, you know, I wouldn't say it's small, but actually trying to address turkeys.
Yes.
Because it seems to be in the newspaper a lot. I have received some complaints on wild turkeys. It's something that I've never dealt with before
Right.
as a health official. So I want to see how we can actually address that.
Right.
And, you know, those are just some of the things that's, you know, on my list. There's a few others along with climate change.
Right. Right.
So.
Right. Now, as you mentioned, you know, for climate change, can you share with us here for the town of Brookline, what are some of the things that they are planning for regarding, you know, climate change, or what are the big issues that we have locally that pertain to climate change that your, you know, Health and Human Services is focused on?
Well, I actually a part of the Select Board's Climate Action Committee.
Okay.
And so, you know, we've actually developed a plan.
Yes. Okay.
And to, you know, to try to remove greenhouse gases to zero by 2050.
Okay.
And a serious parts of doing that is really looking at the vulnerability assessment. So that was one component. And the vulnerability assessment, we begin to assess if something happens in terms of an emergency,
Right.
what can we do?
Okay.
And how can we mitigate it? And I can tell you.
Now, what do you mean an emergency? Let me throw that out.
So anytime there's a natural disaster,
Okay.
whether it be a hurricane,
Got it.
et cetera, climate change is part of that. That's probably causing that.
Okay.
And how we want to mitigate the impact
Got
on the
it.
community. So some of the things that public health concerns is always vector-borne. What health issues, asthma, and that's one of the reasons
Okay.
we want to take a deeper dive.
Oh, wow.
Because population-wise, we don't know,
Right.
but also to drill down part of the data that we need to focus in on, the collection of data
Okay.
from residents to find out, as the temperature climb, how is that impacting your health?
Right.
Right now, we have went from winter to summer
I know.
in a matter of 3 days.
Right.
That's a phenomenon that shouldn't be occurring at this time.
Right.
And so we really need to take a deeper dive in that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We need to also begin to look at, places that we don't have enough shade, we don't have enough trees, and how we protect Brookline,
Right.
make sure it cools down. Look at ways that we can increase bike lanes,
Right.
make sure people have more access, more walkable trails. How do we deal with parks,
Oh, wow. That's wonderful.
et cetera? So that gives you there's a long list, almost a
Right.
20-page document,
Right.
but it's well in depth in terms of what we want to look in terms of climate change.
Now, you had mentioned with climate change vector, is that regarding that temperatures and mosquitoes? Or?
Yeah, insects,
Okay.
mosquitoes, et cetera.
Right.
So the more, my biggest fear in terms of climate change is we have a new disease that develops.
Right.
What's the next West Nile?
Right.
Because the winters are not long enough in order to kill some of these diseases that might arise.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'm kind of a little skeptical as terms of what's happening in the future.
Wow. Now, you had shared some of the things that were happening, here locally in relation to climate change. I did want to ask you regarding, climate adaptation. What is an area of focus for you that you're most concerned about, and it can be nationally as well as then like globally? Like, what is one area? And I know they can be connected. It's really it's a convoluted, not mess, but it's very intricate and they're connected. But what is a national and a global priority for you? It can just be personally that you see with climate change.
Well, first is for a lot of politicians to accept that it's current.
Oh, that's key. That's very true.
So that's
very
the first part is
Yes.
the education.
No, it's very key.
The next part is what can we actually make a shift for, if it's we're going to electric cars, or we really begin to look at pollution from some of these chemical plants.
Yes.
One of the issues I brought up was Rubber Town and the environmental justice issues
Okay.
that was happening in Louisville, Kentucky. There was actually companies that were polluting the western part of Kentucky,
Okay.
Louisville, and it was predominantly African-American neighborhood.
Okay.
And it was found to have 23 chemicals that was being emitted to the air that was causing cancer
Wow.
in the neighborhood.
Right.
So those things right there are always on my radar
Yes.
in terms of environmental justice and how it's impacting the climate overall. What we can adapt locally. I think Brookline is far ahead of
Very progressive.
most places. It's very progressive in that aspect. We have banned a lot of things. But we still need to look at, when we ban something, how does it impact and can we show the research?
That's true. Very true.
And so those are things that we'll be focused on in the future in terms of what we adapt in needs.
Right.
So.
Well, you had said something interesting, like, for what we, ban, and then what discussion that may come up or assessment. One thing I did want to just go back to was that for the town of Brookline, I know it mentions what are some of the issues, and you definitely mentioned, for the rat and the climate change. Is there anything that you can share regarding in Brookline that I know that I worked on, a committee from the selectmen that if we were removing water selling water bottles, in Brookline, then that made us have to look at our water quality and our water issues that way. How is like that issue in Brookline as far as water quality? And then I'd also throw out that from Mothers Out Front, it's my understanding they're going to be giving a tour on gas leaks in Brookline and how that impacts our trees, beautiful, historic, ancient trees. So wanted to find out from your, what is happening with water quality in Brookline, from piping or such?
Well, one of the things, so I know Mothers Out Front are going to focus in on gas leaks.
Yes.
So we really need to find out the impact of those gas leaks and maybe do a pilot study to see the residents in the area that wear monitors, and we can actually look at the air, how it impacts their cardiovascular disease, if they catch it or not, or some type of disease that it might spur. So that's one aspect.
Okay.
The other is, first and foremost, the water quality is excellent in Brookline. and I would say that because I actually drink from tap water.
Okay.
Okay. I don't do that in Florida.
So excellent from the water supply side, but what about piping or?
From water supply side. So it's excellent from that aspect.
Okay.
There's always old piping in to go back in, and you have to remove that over time. That's just one of the things that occur. Anytime you have old infrastructure, you have to go back in and replace it, especially if some of the pipes are lead.
Right.
So you have that leaching process. I do know we tested schools, and so the schools right now are clear. There's no issues with water quality in the schools.
Okay. Because I know City of Boston had first said some schools were fine, and then said, oh, by the methodology, it didn't really capture, was not good. And so a lot of parents are like, oh my gosh, it was supposed to be great here in Brookline. What's that? How is that really QA/QC'd so that we know our water is great? But we're hearing that our water is good.
The water is good.
Okay.
If I drink the water, the water is good. It's almost like if I eat a certain food or at a certain place, it probably is okay.
I'm gonna give you a clue.
You would have to follow me around.
But that is great, because I know the town of Brookline is very progressive. People are very active, and it's great to be around innovative approaches to like critical issues and come up with solutions. So I have to imagine that it's an exciting place to be, because you can be in the forefront of strategic planning that could be, like you said, duplicated somewhere else.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's not just the study that goes along with it.
Okay.
For me, is making sure we have the empirical evidence as to why we do it.
That's true. So you're saying very data-driven.
Very data-driven.
Okay.
I'm a proponent for passing a policy if it makes common sense. But,
that's great.
But having an understanding of everybody that's impacted.
Wow.
So you have to be thorough in that aspect. We shouldn't pass a policy just because somebody else did it.
That's great.
You actually want to pass policy that has an impact, but also I want to show why it's good and that it's going to work. So that therefore, when somebody calls and says, well, why did you do that?
Right.
And can we duplicate that?
Yes.
You can say yes.
Yes.
And here's the data.
Nice.
Just like we did with tobacco.
Regarding?
So tobacco, before we started going for policy bans and anything dealing with that, you actually had empirical evidence that it was actually a carcinogen.
Got it.
So you remove the hazard, here's why.
Right.
So.
Right. And I think it makes a sound argument, because not that's anything wrong, say like with a, not an emotional response, but political pressure, but you have solid information that can stand on versus political sway or anything else that could contaminate like a sound decision.
Right. So my thought process is science over politics.
Oh, that's great. That's smart.
So if I have the science, then you need to listen to the experts in the field as to why you should do it.
Right.
Now there might be a political stance as to why not, or is it too soon?
Right.
But here's the evidence.
Right. One thing I do want to mention, Lynn Karsten. She has been a great supporter of my work with the Town of Brookline Annual Youth Climate Adaptation Challenge. And I was so pleasantly stunned when I first met her. She was representing, Brookline Health Department, that she really understood environmental issues or public health issues, and vice versa. And there's some people in key positions who still don't see that. Can you just share a little bit, just to educate people out there, like that correlation, because it's not really understood by everybody. They still think it's silos.
So first and foremost,
Okay.
I'm an environmentalist with
Yay!
a lot of education in the
That's
background.
so great. There you go.
So first and foremost, and that's how I started my career in public health.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
To
I'm
me,
so glad
that's
to be in Brookline.
that's the connection. So when you think about environmental and how it intertwined with public health,
Yes.
well, every time you go to a restaurant, that's environmental health and a concept as to why you eat there, why you shouldn't,
Right.
how the food is cooked, grown,
Yes.
etc.
Yes.
The same thing's going to happen with recreational marijuana, period.
Right.
We need to be concerned with how it's grown,
Right.
how it's distributed, what type of foods people use to
Right.
mix it, the THC levels, all those components is intertwined with environmental. Now, when you talk about public health in a broader scope, we talked about trees
Right.
and how it impacts the hydrological cycle.
Right.
So that's a big component when you
Right.
think about climate change,
Right.
which is public health.
Yes.
So that's why this past year, well, I would say this past month, during Public Health Week, we actually intertwined our programming with
Oh, that's right.
BCAN.
Right.
And so that was one of the first times that we have actually done that. So we actually had Philip Duffy to come in and speak on climate
Nice.
change Monday.
Oh.
And then we transitioned the next day to Dr. Hemingway to speak about gun control and gun violence.
Wow.
So
I'm so thankful that you are here in the town of Brookline and that you are heading, as the health commissioner, the Health and Human Services, because just talking with you, I feel that we're in good hands. I'm usually like hypercritical and quite concerned, and now I can sleep peacefully.
well, it's sleep peacefully for the agency.
But I'm really
Yeah.
glad though for all the elements that you bring to that position, that it makes it a very quality approach to understanding environmental issues, the data, how it goes across all people, as well as just the climate change. Those are insight. Those are perspectives and the knowledge that you bring in making your decision that should be there, but it's not everywhere.
No, it's not everywhere, but I want to give credit too, because I have staff that have been around for
Oh, that's
such
wonderful.
a long time.
Yeah, that's great.
And so they have a knowledge base on some of the historical data
Oh, that's
and
great.
decision making,
Okay.
but also the community at large,
Yes.
including yourself. We have a lot of smart people that understand the correlation between public health and climate change,
Yes.
and where we need to be going in the future.
Yes.
The one connect that we need to make is every time we continue to do a study or we want to challenge something that has been done for a while, it takes a body of knowledge within the health department to begin to address that.
Okay.
It takes to increase the staffing to be flexible and
Right.
limber to some
Right.
of these issues.
Right.
Because there's new science every day,
Right.
and we
Right.
try to stay abreast of that.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. So on behalf of Mother Nature, thank you, Dr. Jett.
Thank you for having me. I love it.
Thank you so much for being on there.
Thank
It's really, really great.
Thank you.
Yeah.